Here is McElevin Civil Rights presentation on civil rights throughout history to today.
Painfully as it is to admit, the Constitution, as it was initially written, left room for slavery to thrive in the United States. The infamous Three-Fifths Clause was included into the Constitution as a compromise so the historic document would pass. There was a heavy price to pay for this, though. A civil war was eventually fought in order to remedy this problem, though its problems did not die with the Confederacy. There are countless stories of African American men and women who bravely challenged the systems of government that attempted to keep them below the rest. Exploring the people and the movements that made the biggest impact can help us understand the areas where we still need to improve
Discrimination. During this time, slavery ran rampant throughout the U.S. Thousands of people owned at least one slave, and many of the slaves were harshly abused through things such as whippings and rape. But through Lincoln issuing the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, and people such as Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, slavery was able to be abolished. Frederick Douglass had a major part in the abolition movement. Douglass is widely known for being one of the main leaders of the abolitionist movement and for his speeches. Through his many autobiographies, speeches, and tours, he was able to lead the slaves to freedom. Harriet Tubman was also a huge part in abolishing slavery. In the 1850s, she took part in the Underground Railroad, and even at one point established her own. Through her work and sacrifices, she led more than 70 enslaved people to freedom and emancipated around 300 people. One story and photo also had a major impact on people's thoughts on slavery at the time. A runaway slave named Peter barely escaped with his life from his plantation owner. While he was being treated at a Union encampment, one of the doctors saw his back and was shot. Huge welts and marks were all across his back from being brutally whipped so many times. Through the picture that was took of his back, many people came to realize how terrible and abusive slavery was. Through his story, many people changed their views on slavery.
There were countless instances of racial discrimination far before the civil rights movement began in the mid-20th century. Still, certain events are so horrific that they immediately catch the public eye and inspire change. Most are familiar with the courageous protest done by Rosa Parks by refusing to give up her seat on a segregated bus. Fewer are aware of the atrocities that were committed regarding the 14-year-old Emmett Till. Till had been accused of harassing a white woman at her store. In response, the woman's husband and his brother kidnapped Till, tortured him, forced him to carry a 75-pound cotton gin fan to the bank of the Tallahatchie River, tied him to the fan using barbed wire, shot him in the head, and threw him in the river. The extent and nature of Till's injuries are not fully known due to the severity of the beatings and the mutilation his body suffered while in the river. His mother bravely gave her son an open casket funeral to show the world what had been done to her son. Immense outrage followed shortly after. None of Till's assassins were convicted of his murder.
Justice carries with it an obligation to disobey unjust laws. Martin Luther King Jr. knew that breaking laws would have repercussions and punishments. So he also made sure that his followers knew that though he would ask them to break certain laws, they would need to be prepared to serve the time necessary. One of the most famous forms of protest in this era was called sit-ins. The strategy here was for a small group of African Americans to enter a white-only restaurant or store and simply sit down. By using this type of protest, they would not threaten anyone with violence or break any laws other than being in a segregated establishment. Unfortunately, this often led to violence against them. Sit-ins were not the only form of protest practiced in the civil rights era. Boycotts were very popular, most notably the Montgomery bus boycott. This stemmed from Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat in the front of the bus to a white man. She was arrested and became a figurehead for the civil rights movement. Instead of taking the bus to work, people participating in the boycott decided to walk to school, work, or wherever else they needed to be in order to stop the bus company from collecting their money, which was a large portion of their revenue. These forms of protest were just a few examples of the many peaceful protests practiced during the Civil Rights Movement. Without the courage, dedication, and fight for change shown by these people in the 20th century, we would probably not see the level of equality we see today.
Most are familiar with the Black Lives Matter movement that has been surging recently around the world, and especially in the United States. The phrase as it is used today originated in 2013 after the killing of unarmed teen Trayvon Martin by a neighborhood watch person George Zimmerman. Zimmerman was never convicted of Trayvon's murder due to his claims that his life was in danger after he confronted Martin and they got into an altercation. Over 1 million people signed a petition via Change.org calling for Zimmerman's arrest, and enormous protests erupted prior to and following his acquittal. What we now know as BLM was started in response by 3 black women, Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrisse Cullors. The movement stagnated a great amount until the murder of George Floyd, which took place in May of 2020. Since then, the movement has made a significant rebound and garnered huge swaths of support.
Since the death of George Floyd, America has absolutely seen a huge surge in support towards current civil rights movements. An obvious one being the Black Lives Matter movement. George Floyd's death was a catalyst, basically, that has garnered a renewed push for equality and social justice wherever it is necessary. Some of the things that Black Lives Matter believes are found in their mission statement, which has been updated in September of this year. It's shorter currently, but some of the things that they believe in include building a space that affirms Black women and a space that is free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered. Practicing empathy, which is a great thing to take part in. Engaging comrades with the intent to learn about and connect with their contexts. Something that I read that is interesting states, we disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. Also, cultivating an intergenerational and communal network free from ageism, belief that all people, regardless of age, show up with the capacity to lead and learn, and the embodiment and practice of justice, liberation, and peace in our engagements with one another. So to kind of wrap up our presentation, civil rights since the Civil War era, starting with slavery up until today, have led to greater equality and social justice, and hopefully we as a society can get past prejudices and just be excellent people to each other, and civil rights will only improve with time as we set aside differences and work to find a greater good.